For everyone joining us, I'm Jessica Kramer for MRCTV, and today we're here with education expert Dr. Lindsey Burke from the Heritage Foundation to discuss how COVID-19 will affect education in this country going forward. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Burke.
Thank you for having me.
So as we've seen in the news, many schools, including colleges, are going online for the upcoming academic year. I wanted to ask you what's behind these decisions and if it's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, one can sympathize, particularly with school leaders at the K-12 level, with district leaders, with states even, that there's concern among some about how they really handle the reopening question to make sure that they're providing a safe environment in order for schools to return, to make sure they're meeting the needs of parents and teachers. And so this is something that's incredibly important, but right now it is equally important for schools to think about reopening, to provide that physical reopening opportunity for students. And I think probably even more important for states and local school districts to think about if schools cannot reopen in the fall or are moving toward an all online option, to give families options as well, to provide the dollars that we're spending on education directly to individual students, and to let their parents decide what education is going to be in their best fit, the best fit for them this fall. And so there's a lot really going on right now in the conversation about school reopening, how we think about really reconfiguring resources to make sure that we are putting parents in the driver's seat with that particular conversation at the forefront, enabling them to really choose schools that are the right fit for them.
Yeah, I agree. And we've also been seeing in other countries around the world, a lot of them have returned to the classroom. And so I just wanted to ask you, what's the consensus? What have the results been for other countries?
Well, it has, you're right. It's been fascinating just sort of taking a step back and watching what other countries are doing. If you look at Europe, Europe's a great example. Dozens upon dozens of countries have decided to reopen. And by the way, some never closed to begin with. You can look at Sweden, for example. Sweden never closed down its schools when the pandemic hit. Denmark reopened all the way back. It seems like a million years ago, but in mid-April, Denmark reopened schools there. Germany's reopened. France has reopened. We see some schools in Europe reopening on a partial basis. But part of what we're seeing is that they are getting very creative with how they're reopening and the solutions that they're providing. Some schools are moving a lot of their coursework outside. We all remember trying to convince a teacher to do class outside. So this is something that we're seeing right now happen as a really good solution. Many of these schools are batching kids together in small groups in pods so that they can keep them close and sort of co-quarantine as they're providing that reopening experience for them. So there's a lot there. If you look at a country like Japan, they're requiring families to take students' temperatures and report to the school in the morning before that child goes into school. So there's a lot, I think, that we can look at from abroad and really incorporate here at home as we're thinking about how to structure reopening.
Yeah. Well, I've also been seeing there's a lot of private schools reopening, but the public schools in the same area are refusing to open. So I kind of wanted to ask you, at what point can superintendents and school boards really say it's a public safety issue?
Right. And look, I mean, we can look no further than Los Angeles right here at home as maybe the best, worst example of that. It has unfortunately become extremely politicized. The teachers' unions in Los Angeles have said that they will not bless school reopening. And bear in mind, this is the second largest school district in the country. 600,000 students attend LA Unified. The unions will not bless school reopening until they get things like Medicare for all and increases in taxes and the elimination of charter schools and a defunding of police, things that have nothing to do with this question of school safety and reopening. And so, unfortunately, we're seeing that the unions and special interest groups are really using this question of school reopening as a bargaining chip right now. And I think that's really unfortunate. Adults should be doing everything in their power right now to enable students to have educational continuity.
Yeah. Would you say that this is kind of a way for them to kind of eliminate the competition in the public school system marketplace?
It appears that way in some respects, that is certainly, when you look at special interest groups, that is a lot of what is driving that conversation, is really sort of leveraging this moment to try to keep that stranglehold on public education. And, I think it's really important, and I think that we can take a really hopeful attitude towards some of what we're seeing unfold. If you set the union question aside and think about how civil society is responding to what is happening, it's really amazing. Parents banding together in neighborhoods, co-quarantining their children and creating these education pods, pandemic pods, hiring teachers, paying teachers directly out of pocket from pooled resources, hiring private tutors, and really sort of crafting micro schools on their own. I mean, this is really, I think, just a beautiful civil society response to see. If you think how Edmund Burke, talked about America as having these little platoons, this is what we're seeing in real time right now unfold across the country. So even though we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of politics played on the part of special interest groups around the question of school reopening, at the same time, we're also seeing just a phenomenal civil society response.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a lot of homeschooling cohorts, where multiple families are using what they're gifted at, to teach the other kids. What will this mean for American families overall? Do you think parents are going to have to opt out of the workforce, or do you think that they're going to look at other options?
Yeah, so I think for families, one thing to keep in mind is where we were in terms of homeschooling prior to the pandemic. And so we had roughly 3% of the U.S. population overall who were homeschooling their children. And so that's about 1.8 million kids. I think one of the benefits, the silver linings of this entire pandemic is that we will ultimately see long-term more families really driving their children's education. I think we will see a non-trivial permanent uptick in the number of families who homeschool or microschool or do pandemic pods. And then it has also provided families with the opportunity to take a step back and really examine what their children are learning in their public schools across the country. So that's been another, I think, beneficial outcome, this opportunity that we have that unfortunately has been forced upon us, right? We're all homeschoolers now, but nonetheless, giving parents the ability to take a step back and really examine what their children are learning. So those are two areas where I think we will see benefits accrue long term. Of course, there are certainly concerns right now about gaps, education achievement gaps widening during this time. And then that's something states and local leaders really need to take seriously, making sure that low-income students in particular can leverage their share of education dollars to pay for things like micro schools and pandemic pods. But there are some real opportunities here, and public policy, although it is downstream from what families are doing, should certainly support that.
Speaking of gaps, do you think that more kids are going to take a gap year or forgo college altogether? Because I saw when Harvard is charging $50,000 a year for online classes, I thought, you could do online classes at the local community college for a fraction of that price. So do you think a lot of people are going to be like, why even go to college at this point?
Right. And we know that students want to return to college. The vast majority of them want to go back to an in-person college experience. And colleges are certainly grappling with how to make that happen. They're thinking through things like having different cohorts of students come in at different parts of the year, moving more of their coursework online. But your example, we also see colleges that have said, we're not going to reopen fully in person. We're only going to provide content online. And so much of that tremendous expense that we all pay to go to college is wrapped up in that in-person experience. It's all of the bells and whistles and the frills, right? Living on campus at a university, being in a dorm room, having access to academics, college football, sororities, all of the social aspects of going to college that students will likely lose if it's a fully online experience in the near term. And so it's a great question. Will they be willing to pay $50,000, $60,000 a year if they're not getting that in-person experience? I have a feeling the answer is going to be a no for a lot of students, or at the very least, they're going to do what you said and take a gap year. We'll know the answer, I think, in about a month, but will certainly be interesting to follow.
And lastly, in the past, you've said that this is a great time for lawmakers to make big advances in education. How so?
Yeah, a couple of different ways. At the state level, this is not only a great time, but I think it is an imperative time for state lawmakers to re-examine how education funding is delivered, particularly at the K-12 level. The reason why kids cannot currently access school in so many states is because funds go directly to district systems instead of to students themselves. So we need to really take a step back, state policymakers do, and recognize that a big part of the problem we're facing is because funding is not nimble. So thinking about providing funds directly to families through things like education savings accounts and scholarships is something that is critical for policymakers to think about at the state level. And then at the federal level, as appropriate, doing that as well. The last thing we want to see are billions, hundreds of billions in additional bailout funds for K-12 and higher education. Federal policymakers need to use existing money, give states more flexibility, give districts more flexibility with how they use their dollars, and then as appropriate in places like Washington, D.C., for example, move to provide school choice options for families.
Absolutely. Dr. Burke, thank you so much for joining me. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.